Hello, everyone. Welcome to Facility Compliance Think Tank presented by Solaren. My name is Lance Wolf, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. And this is the first webinar in our three-part series related to building strategies. Today's subject is optimizing your building automation systems. Solaren's happy to announce that we're now an ASHE continuing education credit provider. And after today's webinar, you'll receive an email with an ASHE certificate for attending. But you must stay on the webinar for the duration to receive your credit. This webinar has two purposes. First, we want to discuss the best practices in the areas of facilities, life safety, emergency preparedness, and other compliance-related topics. And second, this series of webinars was created to help healthcare professionals network together and share ideas. We want to see this network grow. A little background on me. Again, my name is Lance Wolf, and I'm the Director of Life Safety Compliance here at Solaren. I'm a former Life Safety Code Surveyor for Joint Commission, and I have 17 years of experience in hospitals at the Director, Senior Director level. And during that time, I oversaw engineering, emergency preparedness, safety, biomed, security, and environmental services. Here's today's speaker lineup. First, we're going to have Adam Zorn. He's the Director of Engineering at Children's Mercy, located in Kansas City, Missouri. Adam's been in the engineering, construction, and healthcare fields for 25 years, and he received his bachelor's degree in architectural engineering from Kansas State University and his master's degree in business administration from Mid-America Nazarene University. He's a licensed EE professional engineer in both Kansas and Missouri, and he still serves on the local CASHE chapter board of directors where he was previously president. For the last 6 years, Adam's been the Director of Engineering at Children's Mercy Hospital located in Kansas City. And prior to that, he held facilities roles at St. Luke's Health System and the University of Kansas Health System. And he's also worked in various engineering related leadership and construction roles in the Kansas City metro area throughout his career. Also with Adam, we're going to have our next speaker is going to be James Plotz. He's the Director of Business Automation Sales for the Western US for Johnson Controls. James has been with Johnson Controls in various sales and operation roles spanning all over North America for almost 20 years. He's lived in numerous places, including Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he has a passion for the building automation business, but more importantly, he has a passion for utilizing technology to meet the needs of his contracting, engineering, and owner customers. James has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and his master's degree is in business, both from the University of Minnesota. We really appreciate all of our speakers taking time out today to provide us with their knowledge on this topic, and I'm sure it's going to be informative for everyone here. A little bit of housekeeping items is each panelist is going to have about 15 minutes utilizing PowerPoint slides. So take screenshots and feel free to use this webinar as a reference in the future. After our speakers are presented, we're going to have about 10 minutes for a live Q&A session. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. Don't use the chat button, specifically use the Q&A button. And if your toolbar disappears, just scroll your mouse over the screen and it will reappear. And the last slide of this presentation, we're going to have FCTT's web address on it, so you can utilize the site to help you network in the future. Well, let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. And we're going to begin with Adam. Adam, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Lance. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, take it away. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My topic is real life examples within a facility, and I want to stress that these are, all these examples and recommendations are based on my experience for the last couple of decades with building automation systems, and in the last decade or so, working directly in hospital settings. I'm not going to make any claims that I have or myself or my staff has implemented all these recommendations successfully yet, but we're all striving to do better and trying to reach perfection in these areas, of course, every single day. So this is definitely more of a do as I suggest scenario, not as I do, but maybe someday I can say that I've successfully, or my team has successfully implemented all these suggestions, and our building automation systems are working perfectly for us. It's a nice goal to have. So next slide, please. So first thought is BAS utilization. It's a tool and treat it as such. in my experience, and it's very commonplace, that our building automation systems are often creating more work for us versus really helping us. And I want to stress that, remember, it's a tool. If it is not helping you and it's not helping you be more efficient and do the work that you need to do, then it's probably not working very well. And either you replace that tool or you get it fixed so it's helping us. Replacing the BAS system is pretty difficult. So hopefully, we can all just fix what we have and make it work for us and make us more efficient. So one of the first steps in that is minimizing alarms and nuisances. And, this is commonplace for a lot of facilities and a lot of examples of what they do. And, it's a difficult process. There are some things that I'm going to talk about to try to get to that place. But as one of the first steps, right, is to make sure that we're only receiving things from our BAS that help us out, and instead of hindering the things that we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis and maintain a facility and operate it. We want to get rid of as many of those things that aren't helping us as possible. And many facility operators, especially in larger facilities, know that their guys are running around chasing alarms, or you're getting into the building management system or automation system and a bunch of alarms are popping up and you just start ignoring them. So not only is it hurting you from operating, but it's also causing you to not pay as much attention to what you need to be paying attention to from the BAS. So obviously it's a double-edged sword, and we need to minimize those as much as possible. And once you get past that first step, or step 2 on here, we can start to utilize the system to its full capacity. Use it to actually manage processes and manage systems and pieces of equipment. And that makes all of the equipment more efficient, and all of our personnel operate more efficiently also. So a way to do that is to set everything up consistently with like equipment. So a lot of this is based on data gathering. Ultimately, when you're not functionally operating the system through the BAS, you're gathering data about different pieces of equipment, and use trends to do so. I'm a big believer in the data gathering properties of any BAS, and one of the things to do to gather that data appropriately is to set up the trends correctly. So when you have like pieces of equipment, like all of your air handlers, all of your chillers, pumps, if we can set those up so that they are gathering data and trending the same, then we have more opportunity to compare operations of various pieces of equipment with like systems and like equipment. So I think that's one really good first step, to make sure it's all set up consistently. And that goes right along with set points also. As much as we can, we have a lot of different air handlers and types of equipment that serve different types of spaces. But if we can set up those set points as close to each other as possible, then we again have things to compare to, and we have things to reference back that make sense between those like pieces of equipment. Alarms and warnings we already talked about, but if you're getting the same types of alarms and warnings and at the same thresholds as you are across these similar pieces of similar systems or equipment, then again, that lets you operate them better and have more data to compare between each other. And nomenclature is a big deal also. And this often really begins with construction projects or changes in the system. And you'll have a vendor come in and they'll do a lot of programming, and they'll set up all your systems, of course, and all the different pieces of equipment. And if you can get them to look back or have standards to make sure that they call every air handler an air handler or an air handling unit versus an AHU or an RTU, then you're able to pull that information up a lot quicker, and it makes more sense when you're looking at data. So it's a pretty tough thing to tackle, but stressing that with your vendors is a big deal, and you should probably focus on it, I think, on every construction project. Okay, next slide. So once we get it all set up correctly, we can start talking about efficient processes. And then it's really becoming the tool that we want it to be, right? Again, I'm going to bring up data a lot because I'm a big believer in data, but being able to manage the data and having it, the data that's coming out of the system be consistent and manageable is important. And then to be able to utilize it appropriately, of course. A big part of that, I think personally, is trending. Trends are very useful for a lot of things. One of them is optimizing your systems. You can use that. You can use it to compare like systems and make sure they're all operating in a similar fashion. And if they're not, find out why. And then you can, really try to fine tune the reasons why they're not operating correctly and find out why they should be and how they should be, to get them optimized. And that also helps when you're comparing trends between seasons. And if you have that data set up correctly, you can kind of see what it was doing last season, why things changed when the seasons changed, and then look back to the previous like season. So if you have some issues in July, it sure is helpful to look back and look at the previous July or August and say, hey, this is what it was doing last year. What happened here? Why isn't it doing it what it should be now? To really get it optimized to where it should be operating all the time. And there are different ways to do that. But if you have that data, if you don't have the data, then it's pretty hard to go back and see what's going on there. And the third point is the same thing for proof of operation and troubleshooting. If you have the data from the previous year or the previous season that you can compare things to, then not only can you make sure it's operating, but when you do have issues, you can go back and try to figure out why if you have that data that is set up consistently and correctly. And number 4 is going back to my previous points of making sure they're all consistently set up between those like pieces of equipment. I mentioned air handlers a lot because air handlers have to respond consistently to very different conditions, especially in the Midwest. And, if you don't have the trend set up and the system set up appropriately, it's pretty difficult to compare and find, and, you're losing part of what you have to help operate the systems effectively. And ultimately, this will lead to improvement of workforce utilization. We're all, struggling with that every day, and we're striving to figure out ways to do that and to track utilization and all that good stuff. So this is a half day or a 5-year or a ongoing conversation for sure. So I'm not going to get into that too much because we don't have enough time, but ultimately, that's the whole point of having a BAS, is to be able to utilize fewer workforce, or the workforce that you have, use it effectively. Next slide, please. So getting back into some more general discussion about building management systems, and that is, it's a big job. It's no secret, it's a big job to manage a system. And of course, it gets larger, the larger and older your facility is. And it's an ongoing daily basis thing, hourly thing. And finding the correct way to manage it with the right personnel is very important. And it varies widely depending on what kind of personnel that you have, their training, and how many you have, right? What personnel that you have available to you to operate your facility. So one of the big questions is, should we go in-house with our expertise, or are we going to have a service contract? We're almost always going to have a service contract anyway, just to maintain warranties. A lot of times software components and hardware components are a part of that service contract. That it's going to be really difficult no matter what, no matter how many people you have, to manage all of that, especially when you're doing renovations or changing systems out. So we have a service contract, but then you have to decide how much you're going to use of that service contract. If you're going to have a vendor technician at your facility every day, you might have them on site full time, or they might be coming in, a few times a year or once a month, whatever that works. And so, or however that works best for your facility. And one of the first steps to me is to deciding how to manage it is which is less costly. So I typically, and I think people are learning, hopefully, that you can do a lot more with in-house personnel that are trained appropriately with a lot less cost than you can by hiring a vendor. I mean, vendors have to make money somehow, and they're not going to be making it. You can typically spend the same amount of money on an in-house person as that vendor is spending on their contract, but then they have to make money on the contract. So it's just simple math. It usually means that if you can get someone in-house, you're going to save money, and you can have that expertise at your disposal at all times. So you kind of have to decide that on your own. What are the advantages of in-house talent versus having a vendor provide that talent to you? And if you do decide that it is cheaper and better to have it in-house, then you have to talk somebody into that, of course, usually. And where you find it is from the vendor. That's where you pull the technicians from. So unfortunately, you might be kind of hurting the vendor by pulling talent in-house, but ultimately you're the one that matters. So you should probably go and do it if you can. Children of Mercy has the luxury of actually having in-house talent with a very experienced technician that we did pull from local vendor, but it's been a huge thing for us. It helps us every single day when we're dealing with our BAS system, and not only is it for programming, but every time we make a change, we can mess with hardware and make changes, small changes to the systems. Of course, big things, we're still going to bring in other talent, but it's definitely been beneficial to us. And either way, you're going to have to train your internal staff and decide how much training they need and how many people that you're going to be training. And I think it's important to identify key personnel to help make those decisions. Someone has to manage this whole entire process. And if you can find those key personnel that know enough to make sure that the system is operating correctly and what to do with the internal staff, that makes for sure my job a lot easier. And that leadership is always important. Okay, next slide, please. A couple other things on service contracts, just a few other thoughts I had. It's important, I think, to look at least on an annual basis. You usually have to renew annually or every 2 or 3 years, but at least annually, go back and make sure that you're utilizing that service contract effectively. That person, assuming that you have a person coming in on a regular basis, that they are busy and you're not having too many hours or too few hours to manage this process. And that's going to change. So it's kind of up to everybody to determine and implement those methodologies. But going back and matching those contracts with the needs of the facility is important, and review that annually at least. Next slide, please. Just a few other thoughts. And I talked a lot about alarm fatigue, but I think, I want to really hammer that in. We all run into these pitfalls and struggle with alarm fatigue with not just building automation systems, but with fire alarm systems and all kinds of other automation that we have. And taking the steps to minimize those alarms is very important, because on a daily basis and hourly basis, they affect how we operate the building. So I don't want to, that's the last time I'm going to mention it. But to get away from that alarm fatigue, remember, you got to start from the beginning and set up thresholds correctly. And remember always that and it's hard, on a day-to-day basis, we have our building management system and it's operating and we're utilizing it and we're relying on it a lot all the time. But sometimes we really need to take a step back and say, look, is this thing helping us or is it hurting us? And if it is hurting us from an operational standpoint or efficiency standpoint, think about what those steps are to get past that and to start making it a tool, and that is going to help us on a daily basis. Controlling cost is a portion of that, of course. One of the things that we did at Children's is we actually just implemented competition into the process. So we have a couple different systems here. Of course, that makes it more difficult to operate sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's not such a bad thing because we have competition in everything that we do. We can see and not just from a financial standpoint, we can see what one system is good at versus another and kind of try to get both systems to be better because of that. And that extra viewpoint is very important also to us. And then concentrating on that end user interface. That's another thing we do. And another good thing to, if you have the opportunity to explore various systems, you can see what some do better than others. Not every building automation system is the same, obviously, and everybody has their favorites. But concentrating and making sure on that end user interface is important, because that's part of that efficiency question, is how well are we utilizing it, and take a step back again and say, is this clunky or is it really working well? and see what you can utilize your vendor to make sure that you're using the system appropriately based on how you just interface with it all the time. Next slide, please. The third party thing is, again, goes back to concentrating on what your BAS does really well versus if you're trying to force it into doing something that it's not good at. Children's Mercy utilizes some third party things just because, you know, part of it is having your building automation system vendors really concentrate on the things you want it to do, which is, you know, perform the functions of managing the system, managing alarms, and managing operations. But then there are some things that you might want to use the BAS data for that the BAS systems aren't necessarily set up to do. Sometimes you know, if you ask a building automation system vendor if they can do something, they'll always say yes. But, well, in my experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the system is really set up to do what you want it to do. So a few things that I've done, or we've done at Children's, and we utilize third party vendors are for alarm triage. And again, this was just data management, pulling data out of the system to find out why alarms are coming through, and then setting them up appropriately, really so that you can minimize them and it just provided us another way to triage the alarms and to get the data out of the system that we need. Fault detection we all know about, and I think most of the systems are getting pretty good about that, but from an energy management standpoint, sometimes it's more difficult, and there are a lot of energy management softwares out there that will help you out or that are available to help in that situation. And of course, most of us have equipment specific software, like we have chiller software that really takes a deeper dive into fault detection and operations of chillers. Those are useful. It's very difficult for most BASs to go into those very specific pieces of equipment that the manufacturer has availability to do. Monitoring of venues or devices, and this really has to do with my customers. My customers are the nursing staff and the operators of frontline operations of the hospital. And when a lab or pharmacy needs some data out of my system, I've used third-party software to provide them an interface. And this is really 4 and 5, but providing with an interface that they can understand and also pull data out appropriately for their compliance, the compliance information that they need, and then providing reports that they need for their compliance situations. And that is all for me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Adam. That was great information. You had many great points that you pointed out. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to now give you a few minutes on the surveyor's perspective with auditing your building automation system as well. And this is going to be some redundancy based upon what Adam was saying, but he hit many points and we're going to follow up on those points as well. So next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the advantages. Well, obviously, some of the advantages with the BOSS system is you reduce your labor costs by automating your processes, where in the past, you physically confirmed it in the past, and this helps reduce that cost with the automation. And then second, you're going to reduce the mechanical downtime, because what happens now is you're able to access remotely instead of having a technician on site. So that's obviously another advantage. Also, reducing your operating costs by responding immediately to the environment as it changes. So your system responds to it immediately. You're not having that physical follow-up. And we'll touch on that a little bit further in this presentation as well. Another thing, obviously, this is a big thing, is it reduces energy demands due to efficient operations. It's constantly working towards you to help you with your facility itself. And then the last is multiple areas and functions are monitored through a customized dashboard. So when we're working with your vendor, you're identifying as your facility, grows and what you need on what specifically you need on your dashboard. So that also makes operations more efficient, which is also an advantage. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about some of the disadvantages. Well, one of the first things that I saw was my experience when I was in facilities and as a surveyor was staff became self-reliant on the data on the screen. So there was no checks and balances built into into your auditing program. Also, staff will also dismiss complaints or work orders based upon your dashboard data, and they don't go physically to the check the area. So they get a complaint, they walk over the screen, oh, the screen's fine, nope, and then they'll just go ahead and close that work order out instead of actually physically following up at times. Also, another disadvantage is your regular maintenance can be overlooked based upon the data that's given by the building automation system. So if you're looking at your dashboard, everything seems to be looking, good. You don't have any trends going on. That regular maintenance, there's a tendency at times for staff to close out those PMs because the information they're getting on the screen. Well, that is a problem right there, especially on a surveyor perspective, because what will happen is if there's something is found, your surveyor is going to ask, hey, what's your manufacturer's recommendations? And if you're not following them up based upon what your BAS system is, giving you, then that's also a disadvantage. And then the last is staff become complacent with the program and they fail to identify trends indicating the system failures, just like Adam talked about. Over a period of time, if it's creeping up and you're failing to look at those trends, you're going to not realize that your system's actually starting to run out of control. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of failure to audit that I saw as a surveyor. Is one, there was too many set points inputted, and so it was causing the system to continuously respond to the set points and not the actual environment that was occurring. Also, I saw that upgrades with computer system, it didn't reach the entire system. It only stayed with the system terminal. So the upgrade got there and the system was showing it within the dashboard, but it never got any further. The next one is going to be kind of a future trend as well, and we'll talk about this further in this presentation, is failure to institute cybersecurity measures. And specifically with this area is regarding ransomware. There has been situations where BOS systems have been taken over by a ransomware, and some facilities actually have taken it upon themselves to actually pay the ransomware to be able to get their system back because they had no control over it. And then the last is failure to identify your system is operating in fail-safe mode because you've lost that connection failure. So one example, as the surveyors, I came in and they were fighting with their system and they could not figure out what was going on. Well, nobody checked to see if they even had a connection failure, in starting in the process. And that's what happened. And so unfortunately, they had multiple findings during that survey just because they had lost that connection failure. Next slide, please. So here's some recommendations for your critical air pressures. And this is what I recommend for your survey. Is it's important to verify your critical air pressures physically. And you want to make sure your system is operating correctly, because I've had examples when I've been on survey where the dashboard has been given, is giving false readings. And one specifically that I can remember is that there was a pitot tube that was failing, that was sending back false indicators showing that the OR room was negative and it was positive. So one thing that I recommend is when you have your survey or build into your program, your PM program, an auditing system specifically for critical air pressures. And now this is something that you identify as a facilities director or facilities manager on what you feel is best for your program. But here's a couple examples that are real quick and easy. One is ball on the wall. A little bit about this as well is Adam Zorn and I had a conversation about this yesterday, and he brought up an excellent point. Was one thing with the ball on the walls is you've got to make sure that if you are utilizing them, you have to clean them after a period of time because they do have dust and debris that will build up in them. Another one is, and this is a quick and easy one, is a vanometer. And this is just walking around at the bottom of the doors, you're checking your pressures and your critical air pressures. And this specific piece of equipment with the vanometer is what your surveyors are going to be using with Joint Commission as well when they go around and check during survey. Next slide, please. So some more recommendations. One, work with your staff. You want to determine a specific auditing program for your facility based upon your system. Get with your staff, sit down with them and see what they feel is best for your organization. Also, you're going to want to utilize your vendor to help identify an auditing program and sit down with them and let them know specifically what you're wanting to do. So if it's with critical air pressures, utilize their experience to identify what your auditing program is going to be. Also, educate your staff on trending within your program. Make sure that they understand that don't look at the specific data that is being presented in front of them, that they're going to want to look back to identify the changes in those trends. And the reason why is there's certain things that with trending that can become a finding with Joint Commission when they're doing their survey. Next, evaluate your system based upon length of time and service. You're going to want to constantly follow up with those auditing and make sure that your system is still doing what you expect it to do. And Adam had excellent points on this as well. So I definitely recommend doing that. And then last is embrace the trust but verify concept, especially in your critical areas. So you're trusting your system, but with your auditing, make sure you're verifying to ensure that the system's giving you everything it needs. Next slide, please. So some of the future trends, one is automation is going to continue to increase as technology increases. It happens every day. And think about, there's already programs out there that are being developed that are going to be obsolete in 5 to 6 years. Next is mechanical equipment designs are going to continue to integrate and use an AI technology. So your systems are going to become more efficient, but you're still going to want to make sure that you audit that. Don't just focus on the AI portion of it and get to the point where the systems are absolutely hands off, you never touch them. Next is future. With the future is your staff is going to be required to increase the knowledge in operating software platforms and programs. So with your future designs, you're going to want to make sure that your staff come in are able to really integrate with these programs and be able to operate them. Next is building maintenance programs. You're going to continue to have more demands related to regulations with these future building designs. And for example, is the building designs are going to get to the point where you're going to be able to segregate areas, change pressures, change entrances, and completely take a building or a specific area and cut it in half basically and be able to operate off 2 separate systems. And then last, and this is related to this one I just spoke about, is building automation is will integrate building segregation and immediate pressure relationship changes. And this is already happening right now with future building trends in the state of California. They're already working on this. And the example that I can talk about right now that I've just recently been dealing with is an ER area, is that they're actually focusing on completely segregating the building to where they're able to change pressure relationships quickly. Next slide, please. Well, that's all I have for this. So next, we're going to introduce James Plotz. And James, are you there?
I am.
Okay, James. Well, take it away. And thank you for your time. And James is going to talk about major shifts in building technology.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with this story. So as we mentioned in my bio, a lot of my background is Minnesota, so I'll start with the Minnesota story. There was a movie Disney put out several years ago called Miracle. And several in my organization have heard me speak about this before, but I enjoyed a very particular scene in this movie. And it's the scene right before the US American hockey team was going to play the Soviets. And there's this tense moment where the coach, Herb Brooks, who was a legendary University of Minnesota hockey coach, comes in, and as he walks in, he looks around and said, "Great moments are born of great opportunity." And I love that line, especially as it relates to the building automation field, because we are truly at a moment, and I believe this, a great moment that is going to be born of great opportunity through the technology that's going to be made available to us. Next slide, please. So if we think about it, we've gone for many generations from pneumatics to RS-45 or MSTP backnet trunks. These are things that were quite common, that we're very comfortable with, but we can feel the inertia of change occurring within building automation. I'm going to use an example. There was a period of time when VHS tapes were absolutely the mainstay of watching videos. I mean, there was local corner drugstores, local movie shops everywhere where you'd go and actually rent a VHS. And then Blockbuster came, and then Blockbuster had DVDs, and Blockbuster had Blu-rays. And then Blockbuster started to fade away, and we started to move away from that technology entirely and move to Netflix. So you can see disruptive technologies happen. The concept of watching a movie didn't change, but the technology with which we wrote to watch that movie was constantly being upgraded. We're seeing that exact same thing play out in building automation. The inertia of technology is tugging us in a direction that's different from what it was in the past. right? We're starting to see, it turns out that the flat earthers were right. The technology and layer is actually flattening. We're not seeing tertiary or secondary loops as much as more things residing on an IP network. So like literally plugged in with an Ethernet cable. We're seeing more and more technology residing from a wireless perspective as well. And we're seeing an intersection between the IT community and what I'm going to refer to and is referred to in the industry as the OT community, operational technologies. And there's challenges and there's cost savings opportunities that come with that. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of is we're seeing a lot of this concept of the Internet of Things, which can still be a grandiose topic that we try to get our arms around. But what it truly is pushing the smarts out into the field controllers that exist out in the workplace. I'm going to use a different analogy. When I walk into my house, I have Alexa here. And so I can say, Alexa, turn on my lights. Alexa, adjust the temperature. Alexa, turn on my security system. The central integration methodology exists, but it can integrate into the smarts of all these other different systems. So in our residential spaces, right, in our homes, we already have a lot of integration and smart technology that already exists. As we sit back and think about it, that's in residential spaces. The tug, the inertia that's going to be pulling on this is absolutely pulling this into the commercial space as well. And what it's going to allow for is more flexibility in what systems you grab data from with less dependence on a single vendor. So you're going to see more devices, like I can buy one device at my house for lighting control and another device for security, and they integrate seamlessly into my Alexa app. You're going to see more and more of that exist over the next few years as technology pulls us more towards an integrated environment. Next slide, please. You're also going to see more and more of a virtualization of components. So what does that mean, right? So in the past, when I used to bid building automation systems, we would look at the specification and an engineer would say, thou shalt be a Dell server with these qualifications and a hard drive of this size. And you betcha we would go and do that Minnesota thing, you betcha we would go and order that exact server. And upon turning it over to the hospital or the school district or whatever, it was not uncommon for the IT director to look at us and go, oh, that's nice, but we're not a Dell house. We're an HP house. I'm not going to touch that server. So now we have a server that's sitting there that's no longer supported by the IT infrastructure within an organization. And as we all know, I mean, we wouldn't nowadays load a Microsoft XP onto a computer, at least our IT folks wouldn't let us, and put it on a network because of the security risks. But yet security risks and cybersecurity has become a bigger threat to our organizations. And so this importance of keeping our software upgraded, I think Adam mentioned, it's important to have software agreements, or I should say service agreements, at least on the software side, to make sure that we're at the latest revision for no other reason to protect against cyber threats. But the other thing that's mentioned here on this slide is this concept of virtualization. Often when you go and talk to owners, the last thing they want is another server. IT folks have server capacity like crazy. Heck, and nowadays I'm sitting here at my computer here at home in Minnesota or Wisconsin. I got 3 computers sitting on my desk. IT divisions are the same way. So instead of having another server to take care of, many of them would much rather virtualize your environment on their server so that the IT folks can have their own internal security, protect that data without having another component somewhere else to manage. Again, we talk about this OT, operational technology, and IT intersection. This is one of those places. And so instead of providing thousands of dollars worth of servers that really aren't needed, when we sit and look at projects, this is actually one of the first questions we ask is, do we need to provide this? Do we need to provide a Microsoft license? Or can we utilize the existing infrastructure so we don't end up with a Dell versus HP struggle in the long run? Next slide, please. So again, you've seen this change leads us towards convergence, right? More and more devices as we follow the tug, the inertia of technology are going to be residing on an IT infrastructure backbone. It's going to be more devices that sit on the Ethernet and shared subsystem data with one another, right? We can't push back on that technology because it's already coming. It's just a question of when we adopt it and when we find the use of it. It's funny. One of the things I gained from Adam's conversation is there's two factors that truly impact building automation. One of which is cost and one of which is usage of the data. So I've had facilities, medical outpatient buildings that have simple drop stats to rooftop units. I've had medical office buildings that have had full-blown Metasys systems. In some cases, the drop stats work fine for whatever the particular facility group is that's managing it. But in other cases, they can't possibly get the data they want out of it because it's so simple. But to Adam's point, on the other side, you can have an overblown Metasys system, in my case for Johnson Controls, or any facility system for that regard, that's too complicated that people don't get the use out of because they haven't been trained or just don't understand it well enough. So you can see the balance that we fight on a regular basis between upfront cost and the actual usability of the system. And I will say this, the other thing that's occurring within this OT and IT convergence is the simplification of data. Adam talked a lot about the fact that, the struggles to find top talent to help maintain our facilities on a regular basis. And one of the things that building automation providers are doing is they're trying to simplify the user interfaces with which you access the data so that you don't need that high-level technician to get the same amount of work done as you may have in the past because it's a simpler interface. Next slide, please. Right, which leads us to the final, and Adam mentioned it as well, right? He's a fan of data. And there is data out there like crazy. In fact, there's almost too much data. Many times we sit back and I can think of a particular university up in the Midwest where we opened up their data system and they had something like 10,000 unanswered alarms. That's incredible, right? Too much data to be able to react to it. And so one of the other trends we're seeing within the industry is taking the data that's coming through the systems and simplifying it, quantifying it, making it more usable, more user-friendly. I'll give you a simple point. Building automation providers are notorious for taking a VAV box and putting 50 points on a particular screen so you can see that VAV box, right? And you know everything that's happening with that VAV box, man. If the sheet metal is getting warm, you know it. But the question is that actually functional? And do all of our technicians need that data? Or is there a simpler way to relay what's going on with that VAV box to the end users to maximize the efficiency of how they interface with their system? It's about data usage. So one of the challenges we face within this industry is taking that data and simplifying it, improving the value of the data by making actionable, but also simplifying the user interfaces. Make those changes so that people in the long run will actually use the system and get more out of it. That's the purpose of this. I mean, again, technology is pulling us into a place. I keep using the example of Alexa, but the reason I use it is I truly feel that you're feeling that tug. When we hire our college students into our various programs, one of the questions they always ask, that we talk about integration. Something as simple as lighting control, which you need occupancy for, and building automation control. And everybody goes, wait a minute, I had this integrated in my house. Why isn't this integrated in our buildings, our commercial buildings? We all know it's more challenging than that, but you can feel that tug from inertia. Next slide, please. So again, I know it was only a couple of minutes there, but if you were to ask me in 10 years, what are we going to see? I think we're going to see more IP controls. You're going to see more disparate vendors on the system. I think you're going to see more wireless. And you're going to continue to see this concept of a system integrator play out, that Alexa within a commercial building that is tying different systems together, including things like work order management systems, and taking that data to make it more usable and actionable long-term. So that's all I had.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, James. Once again, that's great information, and I'm very appreciative that you touched on what some of the future trends are as well. So we've covered a lot of information, within this last hour, and we're going to open up for our Q&A questions. But I see we already have some in the queue already, so we'll go ahead and just start answering them while the rest of you, give you some time to put in your questions as well. The first one we've got is actually Adam. This one's going to be for you. And the question is do you feel that staff in the engineering field will eventually be required to exhibit the ability to work with software programs prior to employment?
Yeah, we already have requirements. It's pretty tough now to work anywhere. or any sort of technical requirements, because we all got to sit in front of a computer at some point. Most of us in this industry do. So it's something that it's already a conversation, and we have some software programs, including the building automation system, that all of our staff is going to have to use at some point. They have work order management systems. They also have some other event logging software that is just a requirement of the job. And you take that steps further, like working in Excel or Word. Just being able to type effectively is important nowadays. And I have the luxury of probably having a lot of methods to provide training when it's needed, but for sure it's going to become more and more important. So I don't think we can avoid it at this point. In 20 years, I can't imagine what the requirements are going to be based on looking back, 20 years previously, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. That's actually a great point there, because I saw that surveyed as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right with the changes that are coming up. Okay, so we've got another one in the queue here, and this one's going to be for James. So James, actually, I've got two questions there that are related specifically to this topic. So we'll knock them both out with this. Are there any areas that you see in building automation software expanding into within the next few years that are not directly involved with mechanical automation? So I'm assuming, the examples that you're utilizing with lighting, and, where do you foresee BOSS systems expanding into?
It's a great question. So traditionally, if you look at the way buildings are designed, it's quite simple for us now to consider an integration pathway to mechanical systems, right? Like the question asked, chillers, boilers, VFDs, simple interfaces on that side. The next iteration of this is going to be to take a walk from our Division 23 specifications over to the electrical side. And that'll be the first true step, is when we start seeing more integration to power management systems, generator systems, lighting control systems. It's funny, we talk about certification, integrating to fire alarm systems. I mean, that integration has become so simple. It's no longer just monitoring an alarm point. I mean, we can take it and monitor fire smoke damper end switches on multiple systems through a backnet interface on the fire side. So I think the next step is going to be a more holistic view of what's going on from the electrical side, usually using like a Modbus type protocol. But I'll tell you, the next iteration that really starts to get fun is when we start looking at APIs and other integration paths to an owner's, we'll call it their network systems, the stuff they buy outside of the contracting chain. So that's like your maximal work order management system, and having automatically deploy work order based on a critical alarm that's issued on the BAS side without human intervention. So you're going to see, I think, more and more of that kind of API type interface to third-party systems that exist on an owner's network based on the needs.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we've got one more here. Actually, I can answer this one. The question is specifically, does Joint Commission look at building automations during survey? And I touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but absolutely they do. Especially during a survey, if I'm finding an area that I'm not getting, the pressures that are needed, and it turns into a conditional type finding, is I start following up to see what the issue is with the engineers that are with me on that time. But, one thing that is also critical in this area is not only are you finding that, and this is an area that actually could come up with two specific separate findings. One, you got the critical air pressure, which will be a finding if that's not correct. The second one is actually in regards to your PM program, and this is going to be specifically related to EC 2505 EP4, which is going to be your building inventory. Then I'm going to start following up into your PM program and see what specifically you're doing for your maintenance on that. And if you're not doing the maintenance based upon manufacturer's recommendations, or you haven't identified an AEM program, that's where those two specific findings come up. And with that, as you well know, if you already have the conditional finding, that secondary finding of EC 2505 is going to attach. So when that follow-up comes up, then we're going to look even further into that PM program when you get that follow-up survey from Joint Commission. And that's specifically where the areas that I focused on. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay, we got a couple more questions here. Actually, we got 3 more questions here that have popped up. One, Adam, this one's going to be for you. And it says, hi, Adam, do you have recommendations for how to set up and integrate your VAS trends and set points for a ventilation management program for hospital operating rooms? And the ultimate goal is being to avoid infection control risks and operational disruptions for the ORs.
Sure, thanks, Lance. This could be a whole nother seminar or webinar topic, I think, for all 3 of us. You know, to take a step back, I think it's important to, on this question, to take a step back from the building automation system. And Lance, chime in here if you, as you see fit. But one of the things that I think facilities and engineering folk have fallen into a trap, and our frontline staff with Joint Commission and surveyors is, you know, Joint Commission shows up with a lot of different people. It's not just the environment of care people that show up. They're out in the clinics and they're asking clinical folk information about functions of the building and their surroundings that are vital to things that they should be controlling and should know about. And I think it's important to give that frontline user, the nursing staff, the physicians, as much information as they need to be able to answer the questions about their environment that they're ultimately responsible for, especially in a situation like this, where in the past, a surveyor might go to a nurse in the operating room area, in the surgery suite, and say, hey, what do you know about the environment here? Well, how do you know that the system's negative? Or, well, sorry, that your room is positive, and that the temperature is correct and all that kind of stuff. And they might have various answers for that, obviously. But it's important to me that they have a very obvious way to answer the question of, is that room safe? And so what we've done, and that's where it all starts, because it used to be, oh, well, engineering takes care of that, right? And then you open up this big can of worms of, okay, well, let's see where that takes us, right? And to Lance's point, you know, he mentioned that, okay, well, now let's go look at, let's go to talk to engineering and see how they manage this whole process. And how do they know, and why do they know, and when it has alarmed, what have they done with it, and all that kind of stuff. So then they're going to go look at your building automation system, and they go and they see that one of your rooms is not per snuff, then you're in all kinds of trouble. And you gotta, you know, then you have months of answering questions and providing information and coming up with ways to show that you're actually on top of it. So, but if that end user, if that frontline staff says, I know exactly what's going on and I can tell you why. And so that's what I've done, is provided monitoring, actually continuous monitoring at each room. So a decon room will show negative, and it will show the temperature parameters and what the actual temperature is. You go to an OR, and right outside the OR doors, there's a monitor that shows the environmental characteristics of that room. So they can answer at any time what the environment is, and they are performing those checks prior to starting any cases also. So that's the best place, I think, and it's extremely important to start there and to educate that staff on how to manage those questions when they come up. Second part is, of course, we have all this data. Training is important. You're going to set your alarms up, obviously, so that, and that's another, so when they come to talk to us and we say, well, hey, yeah, we'll get an alarm. If we don't get a call from staff, which is our preference, that, you know, an OR nurse is calling us up and said, hey, look, my screen is red and I'm about ready to start a case. What do I do? If we don't get that warning, which should be the first line of defense against this, then we do have the data to fall back on. You should be getting warnings. Another thing that we do when it goes out of whack, another thing that we do is actually provide reports. And we do that in some locations, not others, but we pull data off. It just dumps data from the building automation system. You know, you can have it spit it out every 5 minutes, every hour, every day, whatever it is. And we can actually go back and show that, yes, for that entire month, this is where we went out of whack and why. When it wasn't positive, it's because we were doing a PM, and we have an explanation for that. So there's a lot of ways, and we can talk about this like for a long time on how to manage it. But utilizing the tools depending on what your staff is capable of and what they need and what that end user really wants from you is important, and setting those parameters and expectations. And then again, we've talked ad nauseum about the fact that we have so much data that you can kind of present it however you want to present it, either electronically or through a report, or just handing someone a piece of paper that says, yeah, you were compliant last month. So it kind of depends on what you have available and how you want to use it.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right on specifically on the survey aspect. I mean, there's so many pitfalls in that area, just specifically on that area while survey is occurring that a joint commission surveyor could go.
Yeah, and feel free. I'd love to discuss more about that. So feel free to contact me outside of this call, and we can talk more about it.
Okay. All right, and then James, I've got another one for you, and so the question is, hi James. Clearly, there are benefits to these new and developing technologies. What are the risks of relying solely on a BOSS system and technology automation regarding lack of backup, redundancy, and wireless signal loss? And then how do you minimize those risks?
I love this. This is such a great question. So a typical building automation system, I'm going to go with an MSTP system right now. I'll give you a great example. There's a hospital network, a large one in the West Coast, and they had a facility technician that decided that they were going to clean up some old wires in a building. And they took a Sawzall and went, and the entire building went, and I quote, "Bew." And they took out lighting, BAS. I mean, the number of systems they took down when they cut through this bundle of cables was awesome, right? But it illustrated the weakness in particularly the building automation system, which is that a standard building automation network has got an RS-485 bus, just the communication trunk. And if you cut it, anything below that device, you lose. Now, they can all go to their standalone programs, but if you cut the bus, anything below it, you lose. There's another challenge with BACnet. Now, we all love BACnet because it's open, but the downside of BACnet is it's open. So people with malicious intent can get a $5 piece of software off the internet, and if they're on your network, they have access to your BACnet devices. I give you those two examples because as we move towards wireless and BACnet IP, there's really interesting redundancy and security protocols that are being built into both. For example, if I was going to do a building right now, I would strongly look at IP controllers over MSTP for a couple of reasons. One, IP, you can do things with Ethernet that you just can't do with MSTP. So in that example where we called him Golden Snippers Ken, my tech actually sent him a pair of Golden Snippers. Where Golden Snippers Ken cut that line, right? If the bottom of that was actually connected back up to the server or to the router, because it creates a loop, you actually wouldn't have lost communication. So IP allows us redundancy that we just can't do with systems today. And the other thing is ASHRAE is releasing a new security protocol standard called BACnet SC, Secure Connect, which is encrypted BACnet, which won't be available on MSTP, but it will be available on IP. And similarly with wireless, it's not just like your home wireless that's just broadcasting out. The modern networks have mesh, and all mesh means that is one node goes down, the network figures out the best way to work around it for redundancy. So if you look at kind of future proofing, if it was me looking at projects, I'd be looking hard at that from a cybersecurity perspective, a future proofing, and redundancy perspective, those newer technologies compared to the old ones. Again, the building automation is always like the last thing into the technology room, but those technologies are proven technologies that exist that would be strongly considered.
Right. Okay, thank you. Well, it looks like we're running out of time, unfortunately. We still have 3 more questions in the queue. So for those individuals that didn't get your questions answered, we will follow up with you and get that and get your questions answered here, within this afternoon or within the next week. So don't worry if you didn't get your question answered, we will follow up. So that's going to be the end of today's topic. I want to thank James and Adam for your time. That was all great information presented and everybody could benefit from. including myself, and I'll be able to take that on to future surveys that I help people with as well. So it's very appreciative. Couple reminders is we want to email, you're going to get an email with a link to this webinar to review for the future. And we want to encourage you to share this information with your colleagues and get them involved in our future webinars. Our registration is open now for our next 2 webinars. And the next one is on April 22nd. And then the next one after that is May 6th. So go to Solarian.com/think tank webinar to be able to register for the series. Like I said, we want to see everybody grow. We want to see more people on this, and be able to really explore some of the other areas and facilities. And in closing, we want to encourage you to use the Facility Compliance Think Tank Q&A and the group on LinkedIn to get any additional questions that you answered by industry experts. We want to remind everybody that this is an area we want you to interact with other professionals in the field. And our panel experts today are going to be included in this group as well. So we'll be able to interact with you, in the future on any questions that you may have. So keep in mind, our members consist of directors and facility compliance leaders all over the country. So if you're having something in a geographical area, we can talk to somebody that's in that area that probably has that same issue with you and be able to connect you together as well. So that's going to conclude today's webinar. Solarian, Johnson Controls, and our speakers, we want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you next time. All right, everybody have a great week.